I'd like to talk about the ultimate creativity killer. Perry mentioned that we want to inspire you, so I figure talking about a creativity killer is the very best way to do it. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but there's a gentleman named Ansel Adams, who's a world famous photographer in America, who's produced almost a singularly iconic body of work over the course of his career. One of Ansel Adams's colleagues is a gentleman by the name of Jerry Utley, and he's a photography professor at the University of Florida. Utley conducted a fascinating experiment among his students in college. On the first day of the semester, he split his photography class right down the middle. He said, everybody on the left, you're the quantity group. You will be judged exclusively on the quantity of photos that you turn in throughout the semester. If you turn in more than 100 photos, you'll get an A. If you turn in more than 90, you'll get a B. If you turn in more than 80, you'll get a C, et cetera, et cetera. The students on the right-hand side of the class, he said, you're the quality group. You only have to turn in one photo at the end of the semester, but it has to be exceptional to get an A. At the end of the semester, when all of the students turned in their photos, the hundreds from the quantity group and the single photos from the quality group, Utley was shocked to discover that every single one of the best photos in the class came from the quantity group. None of the best photos in the class came from the group that was focused on quality. It turns out quantity is in fact what drives quality. And it's not just in photography. Dean Simonton has conducted research spanning decades across domains, and he has found that the same basic insight holds true in science, in art, in literature, in technology, etc. The leaders in every field that Simonton studied, the ones with the most outstanding and exemplary works, are almost always the ones with the most works. And we often mention in our classes at Stanford that quantity is the single biggest lever that determines the quality of our ideas. So here's my question. Why don't we break through if we know that? And so I want to talk about what's the ultimate creativity killer. I want to ask you to pull out your phone really quickly. This is relevant, I promise. Pull out your phone right now and open your camera app. And I'll open mine as well. So you open your camera app, and now right now I'm looking at my desk. What I want you to do is turn around to the front-facing camera, okay? And I'll look there. Remember, we're talking about what's the ultimate creativity killer. And now what I want you to do is I want you to put your camera, your front-facing camera, on X-ray mode. You get it? You are your own worst enemy, or specifically your brain. That's why you have to access the X-ray mode so that you can really see the enemy. Because the biggest enemy to creativity in your work and the biggest enemy to your being able to deliver creative outcomes is specifically the way your brain is naturally wired. The challenge is in almost all of our creative work, we think in terms of a sprint. We're always sprinting, sprint, 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 move quickly, move quickly, move quickly. But here's the thing, a sprint favors the default biases of our cognitive networks. And volume is not a function of a sprint. It's actually a function of a simmer. And if you want to go for volume, you also need to be willing to slow down. And I want to specifically talk about 3 cognitive biases very quickly. You can do more research if you want, but 3 cognitive biases that are ultimately the enemy of volume. The first is called the Einstellung effect. And I like the name of this because it reminds me of Einstein, a creative genius, right? So the Einstellung effect is the following. Researchers at Oxford University studied both experts and beginners in a difficult problem-solving task that had multiple potential solutions of varying value. And what these researchers at Oxford demonstrated is that for both experts and for newbies, their pattern recognition biases took over, and they identified a solution that looked good, and it actually prevented them from finding the best solution. Literally what they discover is when we find a solution that works, we stop looking for other solutions. Unlike Einstein, by the way, who was constantly looking, he was constantly criticized for looking in far too many directions. The Einstellung effect shows us that when we think we found the answer, we actually stop looking. And so a good question for you to consider is, when I'm looking for an answer, do I give up the hunt when I think I've got a good one? Or will I allow myself time to persist and look for an even better answer? That's the first bias. The second bias is related to that first. It's what psychologists call the longing for cognitive closure. There's a Russian social psychologist named Ari Kruglowski who pioneered this concept. But basically, what he and other psychologists have realized is we are hardwired to seek certainty. And we psychologically experience distress when we face the unknown. So what do? We seek, as they say, cognitive closure, meaning we seek to resolve an unknown situation as quickly as possible. How does that manifest itself? We get in a brainstorm or we get a problem and we rapidly want to eliminate the uncertainty. And the challenge with that is a brainstorm is an implicit admission that we don't have an answer yet. You don't have a brainstorm when you think you have an answer, right? You only have a brainstorm when you don't have an answer. And yet, what research indicates is the average corporate brainstorm, you know how many ideas it yields? Two. Why? Because it's so stressful to admit we don't know that as soon as somebody says something that seems plausible, Einstein effect or otherwise, we all go, whoo, so we don't have to keep acting like we don't know, right? And we all move on because we're desperate for closure. So again, how do we forestall that closure? How do we allow ourselves to sit with that ambiguity? When facing a problem, will I allow things to remain ambiguous for longer than is comfortable to me? That's the question. And then the third bias, again, if you look at the X-ray view on your camera, what you'd realize is there's a bias known as the creative cliff bias, which basically demonstrates that folks misunderstand how long they continue to generate creative ideas. Most people, if you ask them to plot over time the level of creativity of their solutions, they draw a graph that looks like this. It almost always goes down over time. And yet, what the researchers discover is that the graph actually goes up for quite a bit longer than most people realize. And furthermore, someone's expectations of when they get their best ideas are self-fulfilling, meaning people who expect to not have good ideas later don't have good ideas. However, people who expect to continue generating good ideas actually do have both more and better ideas as a result. So it's a great example of when you feel like the tank is empty, I've got nothing left. Just know, empirically speaking, it's not true. Your better ideas are, statistically speaking, most likely in front of you, not behind you. And if you'll avoid the Einstein effect of gravitating to and latching onto the first solution, if you'll avoid cognitive closure and the sense of relief that comes from saying, I no longer don't know, and if you'll reverse the cognitive cliff and see it as a creative ramp, you can dramatically increase not only the volume of the ideas you bring to bear on the problems you're facing, but also the quality of the solutions that you bring. Your biggest enemy is yourself. The good news is that becoming aware of these biases actually makes a dramatic difference on the quality of your problem solving. And if you'll keep these biases in mind, you can short circuit them by reminding yourself and lead to better solutions, both for yourself, for your team, and ultimately the organization. So I hope that's helpful. And we've got about 5 minutes for questions if folks have any questions about what we've just shared.